How's it going today, guys? In today's episode, I'm going to continue my conversation with ChatGPT about the pioneer farmers in eastern Washington. And somebody that watches my channel left a question that really got me thinking the other day. And the question was, what happens when even the corporations can't turn a profit? And I've been thinking about that for a couple days now, and I decided to talk to ChatGPT about it. So I asked ChatGPT, when the corporations finally do take over all of the farms and it becomes one big conglomerate as opposed to hundreds or thousands of families, what happens when all the people are too poor to even buy the food anymore? What happens when you can't get profit from the people anymore? And I ran a number of other suggestions through the prompts in ChatGPT, and I finally got an answer that I thought was pretty interesting and I wanted to share with you guys today. And it's called AgriCorp's Fatal Victory. When the market breaks itself. It began, as all collapses do, with a victory. AgriCorp achieved what economists once claimed was impossible. Wheat so cheap to produce that the cost approached zero. There were fields that farmed themselves, and the skies were patrolled by drones. There was no labor, no downtime, no bargaining, no dissent. They called it the efficiency singularity, a turning point where output grew exponential while the need for human involvement collapsed to nothing. Politicians praised it as the triumph of the free market, and the news called it the era of abundance. But markets have rules. Mathematical, unforgiving rules. And the first rule is simple. If people cannot afford to buy, it does not matter how much you can produce. And AgriCorp ignored that rule. For a time they could. Commodity traders still bought futures by habit. Foreign buyers were still hungry. And government still subsidized the illusion of competition. But automation did more than replace farmers. It replaced consumers. Millions lost their land. Millions more lost the jobs that the land once supported. The mechanics, the mill workers, the rail hands, the small town teachers, the rural nurses, the feed store clerks. Ghost counties spread like a slow infection. And in the company's gleaming spreadsheets, a new column appeared. The Demand Shrinkage Index, the Negative Consumption Forecasting. This was a sterile phrase, hiding a disastrous truth. The customer base was dying, literally and silently, off the books and out of sight. At board meetings, executives noticed the decline. They ran models, and they argued. Some old school MBA warned, we're decoupling from the consumer, and there's no market without buyers. But the new school, the ones raised in algorithm worship, simply replied, if the markets break, we'll replace the market. The room went silent, because everyone knew what that meant. Food is not a luxury product. It does not inspire brand loyalty. Nobody ever loved wheat, and nobody asked for artisanal mid-grade calories. Food is a control system now. When the profit motive collapses, one AgriCorp strategist wrote internally, the power motive begins. Governments were the first to pivot. Agriculture policy shifted quietly, almost invisibly. Subsidies became contracts, markets became allocations, and consumers became dependents. Suddenly, wheat was no longer priced for households, it was priced for institutions, like prison complexes, containment zones, military stockpiles, international food aid used to buy influence, synthetic food processors aligned with Agricorp. The public never saw this pivot, they only felt it. Cheap bread vanished, grocery aisles shrank, more meal cubes and nutritional paste filled the shelves, patent protected products with higher margins than flour. When the people complained that the food prices were rising despite record harvests, the response was always the same: global shocks, transport issues, inflation pressures. It was a lie, but it was a convenient one, because the truth was unthinkable. The food was becoming a lever of obedience. The disappearance of the poor buyer. When a farmer goes bankrupt, the system shrugs. When a worker goes hungry, the system adapts. But what happens when hundreds of millions cannot buy food? You stop calling them consumers, and you start calling them excess population. Governments conducted surveys and declared people no longer economically active. Reports changed language. Low-income residents became unregistered individuals. Unemployed became unnecessary labor capacity. Rural households became vacancy zones. Then policies followed. Families relocated into containment cities. The countryside towns quietly dissolved. Public housing reclassified as distribution nodes. Purchasing rights were tied to productivity scoring, and food access became conditional. Not a right, not a market exchange, but a reward. Earn calories, stay alive. Fall behind, subsist on restricted allocations. Resist, you vanish from the ledger entirely. And Agricorp didn't call it oppression. They called it demand optimization. As public money dried up and tax bases collapsed, the system reached a turning point. Small communities could not fund their own existence. So schools closed, clinics shuttered, roads returned to gravel and dust. The only functioning institutions left were those compatible with Agricorp's new distribution architecture, like drone ports, logistics hubs, protein slurry manufacturing plants, and biometric ration centers. Town squares once held festivals and farmers markets. Now they held scanners, fences, and ration cards. The old economy had customers and merchants, and the new ones had managers and subjects. Food was still everywhere, but free people were not. This transition was not just economic, it was mental. Propaganda shifted from messages of choice, shop fresh, buy local, support farmers, to messages of survival. Calories provided, stay compliant. People stopped seeing wheat as something they bought. They saw it as something they were granted. Automation had not just destroyed livelihoods, it had destroyed dignity. By the time demand collapsed entirely, only 3 buyers remained outside the state corporate system: the wealthy enclaves, the black market syndicates, and the few stubborn farmers still independent enough to eat what they grew. Agricorp tolerated the first, and they infiltrated the second and they hunted the third. Those remaining farmers became objects of surveillance, not for what they produced, but for what their independence represented to everybody else in the system. It represented an alternative, which was a threat. It was no longer a battle over food production. It was a battle over who had the right to exist outside of the system. Corporations bragged that they disrupted industries, but AgriCorp did not disrupt food. They ended the need for a regular economy to sustain it. In the boardrooms, projections showed famine not as a strategy, but as inventory management. The new ruling logic was people must justify their consumption. Those who cannot, do not. Executives framed it in the bloodless language, balancing supply with sustainable demand. But sustainable demand meant eliminating the unnecessary, which increasingly meant eliminating the poor. Automation had solved hunger by eliminating the hungry. That was AgriCorp's fatal victory.